Hello and welcome to No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson has stirred a huge controversy today after a monologue on his show where he was full of praise for the British Empire, even calling it decent and humane, and then going on to say that when the British left India, they left behind an entire civilization. This civilization, he said, included language, a legal system, schools, public buildings, all of which are still in use today in India. He then went on to show a photograph of the Victoria Terminus station in Mumbai, built by the British, and claimed that India had built nothing like this after getting its independence from Britain. Now, all of this has drawn angry reactions today, including from Shashi Tharoor, who's written a book about how the British plundered India, and of all people, Martina Navratilova, who basically called Tucker Carlson a stupid racist. However, this is Tucker Carlson, you'll say, the guy who's been called out for peddling lies and falsehoods and conspiracy theories all the time. However, he does have a very large audience out there that listens to him, and his comments have drawn a sharp reaction here. It also comes days after the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the debate that it's ignited on Britain's colonial empire and the destruction that it has left behind. Well, joining us first on the program tonight is Shashi Tharoor on this. Thanks very much, Shashi Tharoor, for being with us. Firstly, what is your reaction to Tucker Carlson's monologue? You put out a tweet today with angry emojis, and of course you've written a definitive book on the subject.
Well, I mean, I don't want to mix it up with the passing of Queen Elizabeth, who was a gracious, dignified old lady who deserves to be remembered politely and with respect for the very selfless life of abnegation that she led. And I've always said that she's a monarch who doesn't rule, she reigns, and therefore she cannot be blamed for much that happened. Even under her watch, some of the worst atrocities of the British Raj occurred in the 20th century. And while Jallianwala Bagh was before she was born, you can't say that for what happened to the Mau Mau nationalists in Kenya, the Malaysian communists, and all sorts of other groups who were grossly mistreated by British colonialism. But the central question that Mr. Tucker Carlson completely evades as to whether the British were more benign than other colonialists. I mean, that's in Krishna Menon's famous line, it's like asking a fish whether it would rather be broiled or buttered. The fact is that for us, it's not the question of us saying the British were better than had we been colonized by the Germans or the Belgians. I mean, the fact of the matter is that what the British did was to come to a country where they had no business to be, initially ostensibly to trade. They realized that because of its current or then prevailing circumstances, they could establish military control in order to enhance their profits. And they ruled the country essentially to loot it. So they came into a country that was rich and prosperous and proceeded to drain its wealth. This has been amply documented, going back to Dadabhai Naoroji and R.C. Dutt in the 19th century, to my book. And after my book, Professor Ursa Patnaik did a study showing, estimating at 45 trillion, the amount of loot and drain that the British took out of India. So the fact of the matter is, Tucker Carlson might want to be nice about a monarch who passed away, but to use that as an excuse to extol an empire that was essentially guilty of plunder, rapine, loot, pillage, and worse is absurd. I mean, it is absolutely preposterous. For every single thing the British did in India, whether it was building a railway station or laying a rail line or building a law court, every single thing was done in furtherance of British interests, to enhance British profits and to advance British empire. It had nothing to do with the benefits for the Indians. The rail lines were laid down at considerable expense, paid for by the Indian taxpayer, in order to extract more resources from the hinterland and take them to our ports. Bombay had this great terminus that Tucker Carlson is so excited about because it was a port city. And that's where they could export stuff from India and import stuff into India from Bombay. Similarly, when you look at things like the law courts were to exact British justice, to keep the Indians under heel. It took a very, very long time before an Indian was even able to sit in judgment on a Briton. And the number of British judges who let off British murderers are on various specious grounds because their victims were Indian. Whereas an Indian who so much as raised his hand against a Briton could risk being sentenced to life, hanged, or being transported off to the Andamans, and in earlier years as far as Singapore. So there's simply no question of praising the British for doing whatever they could to enhance their own rule. And this gentleman is a right-wing, I don't know what to call him, on American television. But there's no reason to take him seriously until you decided that you wanted me to.
Well, it's because it's generated such a debate on social media, you reacted to it as well. But, you know, the point that he made about prosperity, about buildings, the Victoria Terminus example that he put out there, that, you know, we inherited our legal system, our democracy, our parliamentary democracy from them. Even if the British did this for their own interests, I think what he's perhaps suggesting is that we benefited from it. Now, is that a valid argument at all?
Well, I think that we have indeed got institutions that go back to the British era. But don't forget that it took an enormous amount of hard work by our freedom fighters to wrest some of these things from the British. If you look at the so-called parliamentary democracy the British gave us, number one, it was completely tarnished by their communal divisions of the electorate. So Muslim voters could only vote for Muslim candidates for Muslim seats, for example. It was also tarnished by the fact that they did not enfranchise the entire Indian population. At a time when they first gave elections, it was for a handful of people. They gradually expanded the electorate from 1905 to 1921, from Minto Morley to Montagu Chelmsford, then finally the 1935 Government of India Act after many years of Indian nationalist agitation. And then finally the last election the British held were in the elections of 1946. At that time, India's population was about 330 million. And the entire electorate of those eligible to cast a vote was about 30 million. Only people with property, with educational qualifications and other credentials the British valued were allowed to vote. So it wasn't democracy by any stretch of the imagination. It was only after we won our freedom and wrote ourselves a free constitution that India introduced the universal franchise and let everyone vote. The parliamentary system as such, there are merits and demerits. I do believe the British parliamentary system works extremely well in Britain. I think it's grossly unsuited to the Indian political reality. But that's a different conversation. Here in India, we vote for individual leaders, and we could probably have been far better off with a presidential system. But we decided we wanted what the British had denied us, and so we took it. When it comes to the law courts, as I said, it was there to dispense British justice. And today we're seeing some of the negatives of a system that is far more concerned with process than outcome. So every case is repeatedly adjourned in our country and goes on for decades in some cases. The English language has helped knit the country together, absolutely no doubt. And the truth is that had somebody else, for example, had the Marathas established their empire over India, maybe it would have been Marathi. Had the Mughals been able to retain real power, which they'd really lost by the beginning of the 18th century, the last few Mughal kings in the 18th century were essentially hostages of the Marathas. But had they continued, maybe we would have been speaking Persian. But India would have needed a linked language. It happens to be English because of historic circumstances. But I do want to say that to imagine that the British were being benign is an absolute insult to history, because the British were in it for themselves. They made no secret of that, essentially to each other. As late as the late 1920s, I've quoted in my book, a British Home Secretary is saying, we took India by the sword and we ruled it by the yardstick. We're there to get what we can from India. Let's stop all this hypocritical cant about being there for the benefit of the Indians. That's wrong. We're not. And at least the British admitted it to themselves. We should not now allow other people, especially not some right-wing American pundit, to try and pull the wool over our eyes. The British found in the late 19th century a justification, which was a post facto justification, to excuse themselves for their horrendous behavior, their killings, their rapes, their looting, because after the British putting down of what they call the Sepoy Mutiny, which we can hail as the Indian Revolt, or the First War of Indian Independence, as some historians called it, when they did that, they needed then to dress up their colonialism, their empire, in some sort of pretense. And the pretense was one of banal colonialism. But they never were interested in the well-being of the Indians. I absolutely do not accept that. There were individual Brits who were kind people, who did good things for good Indians in different places. But the fact is that that doesn't excuse the fact that they were there in the service of a rapacious and ultimately legitimate empire.
Right. But final question, Shashi Tharoor. In all of this, there's this whole debate right now in our country about shedding our colonial past. The Prime Minister has been stressing about that. We saw that with the Central Vista inauguration, Kartavya Path, etc. What do you think? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for some time, and I don't disagree with everything the Prime Minister says. On this, the question that we do need to discover more of our own historic past. I would only say to the Prime Minister and his supporters that they should at least avoid some of the ahistorical claims that are made, which actually tarnish the genuine achievements of a historic past. You know, it's not Ganeshji's head on the elephant's body that actually, on a human body that demonstrates the existence of plastic surgery. It is actual documented evidence in which people have found Shushrutas tools and the actual procedure for a rhinoplasty in the 1st century AD. And that's what proves that India had plastic surgery. So let's be realistic. We had great things to lay claim to, but let's do so in a measured way. And I agree that we have plenty to be proud of. At the same time, we need to live up to that. The intellectual curiosity of the past, the debates, the shastrarth, the arguments, those are now sort of being suppressed today under the benign rule of a Prime Minister who wants us to be proud of our past, but whose minions are busy censoring free speech, shutting down stand-up comedy shows, as you yourself, Nidhi, discussed with Kunal Kamra yesterday. These are things that absolutely do not reflect well on our proud heritage. If we can live up to our great heritage and traditions, then undoubtedly we'll be worthy of a past that was far greater than anything the British left us.
Well, Shashi Tharoor, as eloquent as always, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV tonight. And let me take this straight across to our terrific panel this evening. Lord Meghnad Desai is here in Delhi with us in the studios, London School of Economics. Thanks for being with us, Lord Meghnad Desai. Also with us, Shruti Kapila, Professor of History at the University of Cambridge. And Sadanand Dhume, Senior Resident Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute is with us. And actually, Sadanand, it was your tweet that caught my eye this morning. I hadn't seen what Tucker Carlson had said until I came to your timeline. And you seem to suggest he actually had a point, at least as far as the buildings were concerned. Have you had a change of heart?
No, I haven't. You know, I've been on a break from Twitter and I decided to come back and it just ended up stirring things up. But, you know, I never thought I'd be on national TV defending Tucker Carlson, but I guess someone has to do it. I do think that on that very limited point, he makes a defensible claim, which is that the VT is an Victoria Terminus, now called CST, renamed, is an extremely impressive building. It's a gorgeous building. And that it's very hard to find anything built after 1947 in India that matches that building in its beauty and grandeur. Now, obviously, this is a subjective call. Maybe there are people who think, you know, Udyog Bhavan or Sanchar Bhavan or something else that came up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s is more beautiful. Maybe there are people who think the Lotus Temple is more beautiful or IIM Ahmedabad or whatever, and those are perfectly valid subjective opinions. I happen to think that on this particular narrow point, he is right. And I think it is something that we should think about. Why is it that in the 75 years since independence, the architectural landscape, at least in terms of public buildings built by the government of India, has been so bleak?
Well, that's an interesting point you make. Lord Meghnad Desai, however, is it something that can be looked at narrowly only in terms of, you know, what kind of buildings India made after independence? Wasn't there a larger point that this Tucker Carlson was trying to make about India prospering is, in a sense, under the British and not doing so well after they left?
Well, you know, I'm a British politician, I'm not an Indian politician. But I really have to say that it is about time India lost inferiority complex. Who cares if Tucker Carlson says anything? Who is Tucker Carlson, for heaven's sakes? What does he know about anything? I mean, Fox News in America is bad enough about America. Why do we have to listen to someone like that on India? Okay, Victorian Gothic is a good style, and we have some of the finest Victorian Gothic buildings in India, especially in Bombay. I love them. I used to study in Bombay University, and the Convocation Hall, the Rajabai Tower, the university building, fantastic. Good buildings are good buildings. Now, he should have cited other buildings he may have seen if he has ever been to India. They say, look, this is inferior to that. But, how many Victorian Gothic buildings are in America? Why do I have to take this seriously? I think we have to get things in perspective. Forget Tucker Carlson. We have lots of good buildings. I myself was involved, I haven't sort of seen it, in having the Nalanda University building. It's one of the most beautiful things if you see. It's modern, it's built by an Indian architect, and it's zero emission building, and it's fantastic. They should go see some of this. I won't even talk about the temples and other things because I'm not a temple goer. So I think the important point is,
you're saying it doesn't matter what anybody says. We know what we're doing and what we've done.
It's not even British. Let me say, if a British person was to say, I would listen to it. But the reason why this debate is happening isn't just because of Tucker Carlson, Professor Shruti Kapila. It's also because, look, the Queen has died, and there's been a lot of debate around the world, in the former colonies in particular, and those that are still, part of the part of the Commonwealth. Sorry, about the legacy of the empire and what it has done, and what it has left in its wake. What is your take on this entire debate?
Well, thank you for having me. And first and foremost, I think I'd like to date the Victoria Terminus to 1878, and I think Indians should know that it was the decade of the worst famine in India, when millions were killed, which was called the Deccan Famine, right next door to it. So Shashi Tharoor makes a good point that actually all this was about extraction of revenue and commodities, in that case cotton, which actually fueled the empire, which led to India's poverty and colonization. So architecture has always been about symbolically projecting power. And this power came on the heels of mass death. It's been called the Victorian Holocaust by Mike Davis, and it's a good word for it. So I think one should also not sort of pick out the building so decontextually when its context is mass death and mass poverty itself. Having said that, I grew up in Chandigarh. I actually think Nehru's city to post-colonial architecture is a beautiful city. You might not like brutalist architecture, you might not like Corbusier, but it's an absolutely stunning set of monumental architecture, quite apart from many other university campuses. Of course, I think Indian DDA or kind of Delhi architecture of the 50s, 60s variety has not looked good as time has gone on. But I think to think of architecture purely as an aesthetic, a form, is missing the point. And of course, all of these debates are coming up because the Queen did preside over the decolonization period, and it is also coming in the close heels of Brexit, when empire was weaponized in political debates in England, when the idea of Greater Britain was sort of amped up. Somehow Britain was going to return to its past glory, and as a result there's been a severe backlash, whether it's from the left liberal world, whether it is from university academics, because of course what Tharoor just said is common knowledge to us historians, but he popularized it in a very big debate at the time of Brexit in the Oxford Union, and since then it's just rolled on and on. And so I think you can't just sort of say, with all due respect to Lord Desai, I don't think we can just undo the empire, because it has really been at the center of the making of the modern world, which created new inequalities. It put very big places like India into, as it were, a poverty and a death trap, and we're only emerging out of it now. So how can people just say, let's not think about it? It's essential to think about how empire and modern politics, I would say things like partition, things like the Hindu question, they're all related to the way colonial law legislated and created these.
And they've shaped all of us. They've shaped who we are. Lord Desai, you want to?
Yes.
I think the case is mixed. Shashi Tharoor said very rightly that we had an independence movement which fought the British, and we more or less peaceably got independence in India. When I say we, one time I will be Indians, otherwise also British. But they were barristers. Nehru, Gandhi, Patel, Ambedkar, they were barristers because they thought that British law training would be good to fight the British. Okay? So the contribution of the British legal system is again a mixed thing, like everything is mixed. In history, there are no pure bad and good cases. I know there's estimates of how much loot the company did and so on. But other people like Nadir Shah and they looted and we didn't get any benefit out of that. My point is, India is now 75 years old, and India should say, we've absolved the past. We don't have to go on complaining about that, because we can march on our own feet and we are going to be better than anybody else. Why go on about, oh, the British did this to us, British did that to us? Bygones are bygones. In Britain itself, there were 5 people from former colonies out of 11 candidates fighting for the leadership of the Conservative Party. And Rishi Sunak came very close to getting it. How many foreign immigrants would come in India near to fighting for prime ministership? That's a straight question.
Sadanand, do you want to come in? Are we still too hung up on saying that we're letting go of our colonial legacy when we're not actually?
Yeah.
And should we? I have to ask, should we? Have we sort of, is 75 years enough to let go?
Well, I think
sorry, that was for Sadanand. Sorry, Sadanand, yes.
So I think there's nothing wrong with academics or historians or scholars debating colonialism and its impact. Obviously, right? There's nothing, no one should ever be shutting down inquiry. But substantively, I agree with Lord Desai. I think that forward-looking, confident countries accept that the past is a mixed bag, but they don't dwell on it and they don't blame their present failures on the past. I think that's where you sort of, where I think there's this sort of delicate balance. And if you want to be a successful country, and I think most Indians do, you sort of accept the good and the bad, and you build on the good, and you try to compensate for the bad. You don't sort of say in 2022, oh my God, they did this to me, and therefore I have all these problems. So there I agree. I think it's a question of sort of attitude. I don't think there's anything wrong with studying it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with critiquing empire. I think that's perfectly legitimate. But if you're thinking of this in terms of a national attitude, and if you're thinking about this in terms of where the focus must lie, I have to say I agree with Lord Desai on this.
Shrutika Pilla, I'll take this to you. And also interesting, isn't it, how this whole thing about shedding our colonial past has become part of very much the BJP's political narrative, right? With the whole Central Vista, Kartavya Path, etc. And that's being very deliberately done. How do you see that? I just want to quickly disagree with Dume and Lord Desai, because these debates on empire didn't come from India. They initially came, even now it's Tucker Carlson. These are debates taking place in the West about the legacy, because frankly, roads must fall, no one is getting exercised about Churchill's statue anywhere in India. Our debates are very much about, in India debates are very much about what to do with the so-called Hindutva wave, which is about actually changing the original settlement of 1947, which is about a multicultural secular compact. And finally, I want to say that it is also disingenuous to claim that the likes of Nadir Shah with for instance, the British. I'm with Nehru there, that the British were the exceptional empire in India because it was the only empire which owed its loyalty to another people. I.e., it was the first nationalist empire, and it extracted and took away its proceeds elsewhere. Of course, Nadir Shah was a warlord and did not form an empire in India. But if you think about the Mughals, these are the kind of problems we are getting with Hindutva-led debates in India. That this is where I think our debates are. And they're not the same debates on race, on diversity of the kinds that are exercising British and American populations, whether it's Black Lives Matter, anti-slavery, and what empire may have done. I don't think, I'm in India all the time. I don't see people getting exercised about the British Empire. It's mostly being led from the Prime Minister's office to talk about a decolonization, which I don't know. I thought we were already decolonized. Well, that's another debate. That's another. Yeah, I have 30 seconds, Sadanand. 30 seconds.
So, I think what people are losing sight of is the fact that Tucker Carlson's monologue was actually a critique of America. He was saying that, look, we did so little, we left behind so little in Afghanistan. the American interventions have been so evanescent and threadbare by comparison, whereas the British, when they were colonialists, he wasn't saying that colonialism is a good thing, but he said when they were colonialists, they at least took their responsibilities somewhat more seriously. And I think this has been sort of missed in this entire debate.
I mean, but it wasn't some big favor to us, and he said it was benign. He said that they were humane, and we know that that's how
he said compared to the Dutch, compared to Arab imperialism, compared to others.
I think that's a gross. I mean, we've got a graphic running on the screen. Yeah.
What the Americans did to their Indians was bad enough, and they have absolutely no right to talk about any of this thing. I think let's face it, India is all right by itself. It doesn't have to dwell on its past, nothing like that. It's going forward, and it's obviously going forward with controversy, with debate, with discussion.
Well,
why not?
I have to leave it there, but fascinating to talk to all of you on this today. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. I have to leave it there this evening. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Goodbye.